The origins of the Catholic Church represent a complex interplay between theological claims, early Christian practice, and the gradual institutional development that took place over the first 5 centuries of the Common Era. The historical inquiry into its creation necessitates distinguishing between the doctrinal assertion that Jesus Christ established the Church and the documented processes through which early Christian communities coalesced into an organized hierarchical institution recognized across the Roman Empire and beyond. This dual perspective forms the foundation for understanding the Church's development as both a religious movement and a structured organization, revealing the processes through which a set of small, localized groups of believers became a unified institution with doctrinal, liturgical, and administrative coherence. Christian tradition asserts that Jesus of Nazareth, active in Judea and Galilee between approximately 30 and 33 AD, initiated the foundational structures of what would become the Catholic Church. His selection of 12 apostles, charged with continuing his mission after his death, is central to this theological claim. The apostles were instructed to teach, baptize, and organize communities of followers, forming the initial framework of leadership and doctrinal guidance. Among them, Peter, whose role is emphasized in the Synoptic Gospels and the Gospel of John, is regarded in Catholic tradition as the first bishop of Rome. This designation underpins the principle of apostolic succession, whereby ecclesiastical authority is understood to have been transmitted through successive bishops of Rome to later leaders of the Church. From a historical standpoint, however, these assertions must be distinguished from the emergence of a formalized ecclesiastical institution, as the early Christian movement did not initially exhibit centralized governance or standardized liturgical practice. The early Christian movement existed within a broader socio-political context dominated by the Roman Empire, a structure that governed the Mediterranean basin and large parts of continental Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Judea, the region where Jesus and the earliest Christians were active, was a Roman province under the governance of prefects or procurators, with local authorities such as the Herodian dynasty exercising limited autonomy. The political and cultural environment of the period was characterized by Roman legal frameworks, taxation systems, urban administration, and communication networks that facilitated both the mobility of ideas and the dispersal of individuals. Early Christians, initially considered a Jewish sect, navigated this complex environment while establishing their communities in cities such as Jerusalem, Antioch, Ephesus, and later Rome. Following the crucifixion of Jesus, estimated between 30 and 33 AD, the apostles and other early disciples initiated missionary activities aimed at consolidating and expanding the movement. In Judea, Samaria, and the broader Roman world, these early communities were generally small, house-based gatherings where teachings were orally transmitted, and rituals such as baptism and communal meals were practiced. Leadership structures within these communities were emergent and flexible, involving figures later identified as bishops, presbyters, and deacons. Quantitative data regarding membership is scarce, but historical sources suggest that in the first 3 decades following Jesus' death, Christian groups in Jerusalem numbered in the several hundreds, expanding to larger urban centers in the eastern Mediterranean through the work of traveling missionaries. Paul of Tarsus played a decisive role in extending Christianity beyond its Jewish roots. His epistles, written between approximately 50 and 65 AD, demonstrate both theological development and practical guidance for organizing communities across diverse urban centers in Asia Minor, Greece, and eventually Rome. Paul's letters reflect attention to communal structure, disciplinary practices, doctrinal clarification, and the articulation of a theological framework that could unify diverse populations. His missions contributed to the rapid geographic expansion of Christianity in the Eastern Roman provinces, where urban networks allowed ideas and communities to spread along trade routes, maritime lanes, and Roman roads. The integration of Gentile populations into the movement was a significant development in the Church's early history, signaling a transition from an initially localized Jewish sect to a more universal religious community. By the late 1st century, Christian groups had established a presence across key cities in the Roman Empire, including Alexandria in Egypt, Antioch in Syria, Corinth and Ephesus in Greece, and Rome itself. The term Catholic, meaning universal, first appeared in extant writings of the early 2nd century, notably in the letters of Ignatius of Antioch, written circa 110 AD. Ignatius emphasized the unity of believers under the guidance of bishops, presenting an early framework for hierarchical organization. The reference to a Catholic Church indicated both the geographic expansion of Christianity and an emerging concern for doctrinal cohesion across dispersed communities. During this period, bishops in major urban centers increasingly assumed administrative responsibilities, overseeing local communities, adjudicating disputes, and ensuring consistency in liturgical practices. The development of ecclesiastical authority and organizational structures was influenced by both internal and external factors. Internally, early Christians faced divergent interpretations of Jesus' teachings, ritual practices, and theological claims. The movement encountered competing doctrines, which later came to be labeled heresies, including Gnostic interpretations, Ebionite teachings, and other localized sectarian forms. Leaders responded by emphasizing continuity with apostolic instruction, developing criteria for inclusion in the canon of authoritative texts, and asserting the centrality of bishops, particularly those associated with prominent sees. Externally, Christians navigated a Roman socio-political environment that fluctuated between toleration and persecution, affecting the visibility and organizational strategies of communities. The hierarchical structuring of the church developed incrementally over the first 2 centuries. Bishops exercised oversight of multiple congregations within a city or region. Presbyters managed local congregations under episcopal guidance, and deacons facilitated administrative, charitable, and logistical functions. The Bishop of Rome, occupying a politically and culturally significant urban center, gradually assumed primacy in ecclesiastical matters, partly due to Rome's centrality within the empire and the symbolic association with Peter, considered the first bishop. This period saw the emergence of a proto-centralized authority, though the church remained far from fully institutionalized, relying on personal networks, correspondence, and council decisions to maintain cohesion. The dual nature of the church's origin can be contextualized within this framework. Theologically, Jesus' ministry established the moral, ritual, and doctrinal foundation, providing an authoritative source for teaching and leadership. Historically, the church evolved through incremental processes shaped by missionary activity, internal organizational developments, doctrinal debates, and interactions with the Roman state. Quantitative growth during the first 2 centuries was notable. By the early 3rd century, estimates suggest that Christian communities in major Roman cities, such as Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria, comprised several thousand members, each forming a cohesive but decentralized network of believers. This growth was facilitated by Roman infrastructure, including roads, ports, and communication systems, which allowed the rapid dissemination of ideas and the movement of key leaders. The emergence of written texts was central to the Church's consolidation. Early epistles, gospels, and didactic writings functioned both as theological guides and practical manuals for community organization. These texts codified beliefs, ethical standards, and ritual practices, providing a unifying framework for geographically dispersed groups. The process of textual development involved selection, circulation, and eventual recognition of authoritative writings, laying the groundwork for the later formalization of the New Testament canon. The interplay between oral tradition and written texts reinforced the cohesion and identity of the early Christian movement, ensuring continuity with the apostolic foundations established in the first decades following Jesus' ministry. Interactions with broader religious, cultural, and political systems influenced the Church's trajectory. In regions such as North Africa, the Levant, and Asia Minor, Christianity encountered Hellenistic philosophical traditions, Jewish legal and ritual frameworks, and the administrative apparatus of the Roman Empire. Leaders adapted organizational and doctrinal structures to accommodate these contexts, facilitating both expansion and resilience. By maintaining a balance between theological fidelity to apostolic teaching and pragmatic engagement with diverse social and political environments, early Christians established the conditions for the institutional consolidation that would follow in subsequent centuries. By the end of the 2nd century, the Catholic Church had developed distinct features indicative of a growing institutional identity. Central to this development were the consolidation of episcopal authority, the articulation of universal doctrines, the maintenance of liturgical consistency, and the codification of texts regarded as authoritative. The Church's identity was increasingly distinguished from other Jewish sects, heterodox Christian movements, and competing religious expressions within the empire. The combined effects of theological grounding, missionary expansion, textual codification, and organizational structuring created the foundation upon which the Church would continue to evolve, eventually achieving formal recognition and centralization under imperial and papal structures in later centuries. The historical significance of the Church's dual origin lies in its continuity and adaptation. Theologically, it maintained claims of direct foundation by Jesus Christ, providing a source of moral and doctrinal authority that informed leadership, teaching, and ritual. Institutionally, the Church responded to practical challenges, internal disputes, and external pressures by developing structured hierarchies, standardized practices, and mechanisms for governance. The interplay between these dimensions defined the character of the early Church, ensuring its survival, cohesion, and expansion within a complex and often hostile environment. By tracing the evolution from small, decentralized communities to an increasingly unified entity with recognized authority, historians can account for both the doctrinal claims and the documented processes that constitute the creation of the Catholic Church. The early centuries of Christianity also reflect the interaction of quantitative growth with qualitative organizational change. Urban centers such as Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and Carthage hosted increasingly significant Christian populations, ranging from hundreds to several thousand adherents in individual cities by the late 2nd century. These populations supported the development of multiple congregations, the assignment of leadership roles, and the establishment of communication networks linking local communities to regional and metropolitan bishops. The quantitative expansion facilitated doctrinal standardization, the resolution of disputes, and the maintenance of institutional cohesion, while also enabling the movement to influence social and cultural life within the empire. The historical record of Jesus of Nazareth situates his public ministry within the socio-political and religious context of early 1st century Judea and Galilee under Roman imperial authority. Jesus, a Galilean Jew born approximately 4 BC, is documented to have begun his public activity around 30 AD, engaging in teaching, preaching, and the formation of a community of followers. His ministry coincided with the governance of Pontius Pilate in Judea and Herod Antipas in Galilee, within a broader provincial structure of the Roman Empire that allowed limited local autonomy but maintained overarching imperial control. This environment was characterized by Roman taxation, legal oversight, and social stratification, as well as the persistence of diverse Jewish sects, including Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots, each with distinct theological and social positions. Understanding the ministry of Jesus and the initial formation of his followers requires attention to both the doctrinal and institutional dimensions of his activity, which laid the foundation for subsequent ecclesiastical development. Jesus' teachings emphasized ethical conduct, ritual observance, and the imminent presence of the kingdom of God, addressing both urban and rural populations across Galilee and Judea. His discourse incorporated parables, aphorisms, and expository instruction in synagogues, marketplaces, and open spaces. The content of his teachings, as reconstructed from extant historical sources, demonstrates a concern with communal ethics, ritual purity, and religious reform, reflecting a continuity with Jewish law while introducing interpretative and doctrinal innovations. The reception of his teachings among contemporaries varied according to social, political, and religious affiliation, with followers drawn from a range of socioeconomic backgrounds, including fishermen, artisans, tax collectors, and other individuals from both urban and rural settings. Central to Jesus' activity was the selection of 12 disciples, known as apostles, who were entrusted with specific responsibilities related to the propagation of his teachings and the formation of organized communities of believers. The identification of these individuals was strategic, representing geographic, social, and familial diversity within the Jewish population of Galilee and surrounding regions. Among these figures, Simon Peter, traditionally regarded as the leading apostle, was later associated with the establishment of ecclesiastical authority in Rome. The designation of Peter as a foundational figure is derived from references to his primacy among the apostles and his symbolic role in doctrinal transmission, which became central to the theological principle of apostolic succession within the Catholic tradition. Other apostles, including James, John, Andrew, Philip, and Thomas, were similarly positioned to ensure geographic dissemination of teachings and to provide leadership structures within emerging communities. The apostles were instructed to teach, baptize, and establish practices that would sustain community identity after the anticipated departure of Jesus. Baptism, as a ritual of initiation, represented both a theological and communal marker, formalizing inclusion within the group of followers. Ethical instruction emphasized adherence to religious law while incorporating the interpretive frameworks introduced by Jesus, including principles of forgiveness, communal responsibility, and ritual observance. The organizational structures implemented during this period were informal and adaptive, reflecting the decentralized nature of early communities and the need to accommodate varying social and geographic contexts. Leadership was exercised through personal authority, oral instruction, and direct oversight of small groups, rather than through codified institutional hierarchies. The geographic scope of Jesus' ministry encompassed both urban centers and rural settlements. Capernaum, a major fishing town on the Sea of Galilee, served as a base of operations, providing access to trade routes, local populations, and communication networks. The ministry extended to Jerusalem, the political and religious capital of Judea, where engagement with temple authorities and participation in Jewish festivals brought the movement into direct contact with broader societal structures. This interaction with religious authorities, including Pharisaic and Sadducean leadership, positioned the emerging movement within existing legal, ritual, and administrative frameworks, influencing both the content of teachings and the operational strategies of community formation. The teachings and activities of Jesus also intersected with the economic and social conditions of the population. Galilee and Judea were regions of mixed agrarian and urban economies, with taxation and land ownership structured under Roman and Herodian control. Artisans, laborers, and small-scale farmers constituted a significant portion of the population, and Jesus' message addressed both ethical conduct and practical concerns related to communal solidarity, resource sharing, and ritual observance. Social mobility within these communities was limited, and engagement with Roman authorities and local elites required careful negotiation, as early followers navigated both political oversight and religious scrutiny. The crucifixion of Jesus, estimated between 30 and 33 AD, represents a critical juncture in the development of the early Christian movement. Executed under the authority of Pontius Pilate, the event was a legally sanctioned capital punishment consistent with Roman practices for perceived insurrection or threats to imperial stability. The aftermath of the crucifixion necessitated adaptive strategies for leadership, community cohesion, and doctrinal continuity among followers. The apostles assumed responsibility for maintaining group identity, interpreting the significance of Jesus' death within a theological framework, and continuing his mission across diverse regions. The subsequent expansion of teachings relied upon mobility, correspondence, and the integration of local cultural practices to ensure coherence across geographically dispersed communities. Peter's role during this period extended beyond theological leadership. Historical reconstruction indicates that he and other leading apostles were responsible for coordinating activities across multiple communities, mediating disputes, and preserving the integrity of teachings. The association of Peter with Rome, established in later tradition, reflects the gradual centralization of authority in one of the empire's most prominent urban centers. Rome's political, cultural, and logistical significance provided a strategic location for leadership, communication, and dissemination of doctrinal guidance, reinforcing the symbolic and practical dimensions of apostolic authority. Theologically, Jesus' instructions to the apostles emphasized both continuity with Jewish tradition and innovation in ritual and ethical practice. The movement preserved elements of Jewish law, including Sabbath observance, dietary regulations, and ritual purity, while introducing reinterpretations designed to unify and distinguish followers. The combination of adherence to existing law and the introduction of doctrinal novelties facilitated both acceptance within Jewish communities and the differentiation necessary for the development of a distinct religious identity. These dynamics contributed to the long-term structural and doctrinal foundations of what would later be recognized as the Catholic Church. Missionary activity during this period was facilitated by Roman infrastructure, including roads, maritime routes, and communication systems that allowed the movement of individuals and the transmission of ideas across regions. Apostolic journeys, including those attributed to Peter and other disciples, established contact points in major urban centers, enabling the creation of networks linking communities in Judea, Galilee, and beyond. These networks supported the coordination of ritual practices, the dissemination of teachings, and the resolution of doctrinal or disciplinary disputes, forming a proto-institutional framework that would guide subsequent development. Demographically, early communities reflected a range of social strata, including artisans, laborers, and individuals from rural backgrounds, as well as urban professionals engaged in trade and administration. The integration of diverse populations required attention to local cultural, linguistic, and ritual practices, ensuring that the teachings of Jesus were accessible and adaptable. Quantitative estimates of membership during the ministry period are limited, but the presence of multiple communities across Judea and Galilee indicates a measurable base of adherents capable of sustaining collective activities, ritual observance, and the dissemination of teachings beyond local contexts. The apostolic foundations also incorporated mechanisms for succession and continuity. Designated leaders within communities were tasked with ensuring that teachings remained consistent with the original instructions of Jesus. The establishment of hierarchical roles, including the differentiation between bishops, presbyters, and deacons, provided both administrative and doctrinal oversight. These early organizational strategies, though informal and flexible, established the procedural norms upon which later ecclesiastical structures would be formalized. The combination of personal authority, community-based oversight, and strategic coordination among apostles represents the initial stage of institutional development that would characterize the Catholic Church in subsequent centuries. Interactions with other Jewish sects and Roman authorities influenced both the content and the dissemination of teachings. Engagement with Pharisaic and Sadducean leaders, participation in temple observances, and negotiation with Roman administrative officials positioned the emerging movement within existing legal and ritual frameworks. These interactions contributed to the adaptation of practices, the clarification of doctrinal positions, and the establishment of boundaries distinguishing the movement from other groups. The resultant structure balanced fidelity to original teachings with pragmatic considerations of social, political, and economic reality. Quantitative and geographic considerations demonstrate the practical scope of apostolic activity. Communities were established in cities and towns throughout Galilee, Judea, and surrounding regions, often numbering several dozen to several hundred adherents per location. Apostolic oversight ensured doctrinal uniformity and coordinated ritual practice, while mobility and correspondence facilitated connectivity across regions. These early organizational patterns provided a framework capable of accommodating numerical growth, geographic expansion, and the integration of diverse populations, establishing the procedural and structural foundations for later institutional consolidation. By 33 AD, the ministry of Jesus had established both a theological and organizational framework that would guide the development of early Christian communities. The combination of doctrinal instruction, ritual initiation, apostolic leadership, and strategic community formation created the conditions for the emergence of a cohesive movement capable of enduring the challenges posed by political authority, social diversity, and internal variation in interpretation. The apostolic foundations thus represent a critical phase in the historical development of the Catholic Church, establishing both the leadership structures and doctrinal principles upon which subsequent growth and institutionalization would be built. The historical significance of this period lies in its establishment of continuity, leadership, and organizational principles. Apostolic authority provided both theological legitimacy and practical guidance, ensuring that communities could maintain identity, cohesion, and doctrinal fidelity. The integration of local, regional, and imperial contexts demonstrates the adaptive capacity of early communities and the strategic application of organizational principles within a complex socio-political landscape. This foundational phase sets the stage for the subsequent expansion of the movement, the integration of Gentile populations, and the development of hierarchical and institutional structures that define the Catholic Church in its later historical form. Following the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, estimated between 30 and 33 AD, the leadership of the nascent Christian movement transitioned to the apostles and other disciples who had accompanied him during his ministry. This period, spanning roughly 33 to 50 AD, represents a critical phase in the historical emergence of the Catholic Church as a structured religious community. The early Christian movement operated within the geopolitical and cultural environment of the Roman Empire, where Judea and Galilee functioned as provinces under Roman administration, subject to taxation, legal oversight, and social regulation. The apostles, operating within these constraints, implemented strategies for maintaining doctrinal consistency, community cohesion, and organizational growth across geographically dispersed populations. The immediate post-crucifixion period was characterized by the formation of localized communities centered around the teaching, rituals, and ethical precepts of Jesus. These communities were primarily urban and rural households in Judea, including Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Capernaum, and surrounding towns. Membership was largely composed of Jews who had participated in synagogue life, though converts from diverse backgrounds increasingly joined the movement. The communities were decentralized, with leadership distributed among elders, presbyters, and deacons, roles which were initially informal but gradually became institutionalized. Leaders were responsible for ensuring adherence to ethical directives, overseeing ritual practice, and resolving internal disputes, creating a functional proto-hierarchy that facilitated organizational stability. Peter, recognized in later tradition as the leading apostle, played a central role in coordinating these communities. According to historical reconstruction based on textual and archaeological evidence, he traveled extensively within Judea and to urban centers along the eastern Mediterranean coast, including Antioch in Syria. Antioch became a particularly significant hub due to its position as a major trade center and cultural crossroads, linking the Levant, Asia Minor, and the wider Mediterranean. It was in Antioch that the followers of Jesus were reportedly first called Christians, a designation indicating both religious identity and communal differentiation from other Jewish sections. Peter's activities included the provision of doctrinal instruction, mediation of disputes, and the organization of community resources, forming a model for subsequent apostolic leadership. Parallel to Peter's activities, Paul of Tarsus emerged as a transformative figure in the expansion of early Christianity beyond its Jewish origins. Paul, a Hellenized Jew from the city of Tarsus in Cilicia, was initially active in persecuting Christian groups before his conversion experience, estimated around 34 to 36 AD. Following his conversion, Paul undertook a series of missionary journeys across Asia Minor, Greece, and eventually Rome, establishing communities in cities such as Philippi, Thessalonica, Corinth, and Ephesus. These urban centers, integral to regional trade networks, allowed for the dissemination of teachings to diverse populations, including Gentiles, thereby broadening the demographic base of the movement. Paul's letters, composed during these missions, provided theological instruction, guidance for community organization, and frameworks for resolving doctrinal disputes, serving as both administrative and doctrinal manuals for early Christian communities. The quantitative growth of the movement during this period can be approximated through historical and archaeological evidence, including demographic data from urban populations, inscriptions, and early Christian texts. In Jerusalem, the initial post-crucifixion community, likely numbered in the hundreds, centered around the temple and local synagogues. By 50 AD, estimates suggest that communities in Antioch, Ephesus, and Corinth each comprised several hundred to over 1,000 members, supported by structured gatherings and leadership roles. This expansion necessitated mechanisms for coordination, including itinerant apostles, correspondence between communities, and the codification of teachings that ensured consistency in ritual and doctrine. Ritual practices formed a central component of community identity. Baptism was employed as a formal initiation rite, signifying inclusion within the group and adherence to ethical and theological principles. Communal meals, particularly those recalling the Last Supper, provided both spiritual and social cohesion, reinforcing collective identity and continuity with the ministry of Jesus. Worship practices were adapted to local conditions, often conducted in private homes or communal spaces due to the absence of dedicated religious buildings. These practices integrated Jewish liturgical elements, including scripture readings, prayers, and Sabbath observance, while incorporating interpretations specific to the teachings of Jesus, demonstrating both continuity with tradition and innovation within the emerging movement. The organizational structure of early communities was shaped by both internal and external factors. Internally, the apostles and local leaders addressed divergent interpretations of teachings, ethical disagreements, and disputes over ritual practice. These internal challenges prompted the development of procedural norms, including the identification of authoritative leaders, the establishment of councils to resolve disputes, and the use of correspondence to convey doctrinal clarification across distant communities. Externally, communities operated within a Roman political environment that fluctuated between relative tolerance and sporadic persecution. Roman authorities were generally concerned with maintaining public order and loyalty to the imperial system, and deviations from established religious norms were occasionally met with punitive measures. Early Christians navigated these conditions by maintaining low visibility, practicing in private settings, and emphasizing ethical conduct aligned with social norms. The geographic dispersion of communities during this period included urban centers and provincial towns across Judea, Samaria, Galilee, and the eastern Mediterranean. Cities such as Philippi, Thessalonica, Corinth, and Ephesus were strategically significant due to their roles as administrative and commercial hubs, facilitating the rapid spread of teachings and providing access to diverse populations. Apostolic visits and itinerant teaching ensured doctrinal cohesion, while the appointment of local leaders enabled sustainable administration and continuity in the absence of direct apostolic oversight. The establishment of these communities laid the groundwork for subsequent institutionalization and the integration of new populations, including Gentiles, into the emerging religious movement. Communication and coordination among communities relied on multiple mechanisms. Letters, oral instruction, and itinerant leadership allowed for the dissemination of theological principles, ethical guidelines, and practical instructions for communal management. Paul's epistles, written to specific communities during his journeys, exemplify this practice, addressing issues of doctrinal interpretation, ritual observance, and interpersonal conduct within the communities. These texts functioned as both theological treatises and administrative directives, enabling remote communities to maintain consistency with apostolic teaching and with one another despite geographic separation. Demographically, early Christian communities exhibited diversity in social status, occupation, and cultural background. Members included artisans, tradespeople, laborers, and individuals engaged in commerce, reflecting the economic structure of urban centers within the Roman Empire. This diversity required adaptive strategies for integrating members into communal life, establishing leadership roles, and mediating disputes. The presence of women within these communities, although not uniformly documented, is indicated in early texts and archaeological evidence, suggesting participation in ritual practice, logistical support, and community organization. Doctrinal development during this period focused on the articulation of the significance of Jesus' crucifixion and the theological interpretation of his teachings. The apostles formulated explanations concerning salvation, the kingdom of God, and ethical conduct, ensuring that communities adhered to principles derived from the ministry of Jesus. This process involved clarifying core beliefs, distinguishing the movement from other Jewish sects, and addressing divergent interpretations that arose in geographically dispersed communities. The consolidation of theological principles provided a foundation for later doctrinal formalization and contributed to the emerging identity of the Christian movement. The integration of Gentile populations represented a major development in the early apostolic period. Conversion of non-Jewish adherents, facilitated primarily by Paul, required adaptation of ritual practices and ethical directives to accommodate individuals outside the Jewish law framework. This process involved debate and negotiation regarding the requirements of circumcision, dietary restrictions, and participation in Jewish festivals. The outcomes of these discussions, including the decisions reached during early apostolic conferences, established precedents for inclusivity, doctrinal interpretation, and communal governance that would shape the institutional evolution of the Church. Quantitative and operational considerations illustrate the challenges and mechanisms of community management. Communities ranged in size from tens to hundreds of individuals, with multiple congregations often coexisting within a single urban center. Leadership roles were assigned to ensure effective management, dispute resolution, and coordination of ritual and educational activities. These arrangements, though informal in the initial decades, established procedural norms that would inform the later hierarchical and administrative structures of the Catholic Church. The apostolic period also reflects the interaction of religious, cultural, and political factors in shaping organizational development. Jewish law, Greco-Roman culture, and local administrative systems influenced both ritual practice and communal organization. Apostolic leaders negotiated these factors to ensure the survival, growth, and cohesion of communities while maintaining fidelity to the teachings of Jesus. The ability to balance internal coherence with external adaptation enabled the movement to expand effectively across diverse environments. By 50 AD, the early apostolic community had established a foundation capable of sustaining doctrinal transmission, communal identity, and organizational growth. The combination of localized leadership, itinerant apostles, textual communication, and adaptive ritual practice ensured continuity across dispersed communities and set the stage for the inclusion of additional populations beyond Judea and Galilee. These developments represent the consolidation of early Christian organizational principles and the preparation for subsequent institutional formalization, which would accelerate in the 2nd century. By the late 1st century AD and into the early 2nd century, the Christian movement that had emerged from the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth and the apostolic activities of Peter, Paul, and others began to exhibit greater structural coherence, doctrinal articulation, and terminological identification. This period, approximately 90 to 110 AD, is notable for the first recorded use of the term Catholic to describe the emerging community of believers. The word derived from the Greek term katholikos, meaning universal or according to the whole, reflected both the aspiration of the movement to transcend local and regional boundaries and an increasing awareness of the need for doctrinal and organizational unity among dispersed communities. The appearance of this terminology provides a window into the institutional and conceptual consolidation occurring within early Christianity, marking a pivotal stage in the historical development of what would become the Catholic Church. Ignatius of Antioch, a prominent bishop in the city of Antioch during this period, is the earliest known figure to employ the term Catholic in his letters written during his journey to Rome, where he faced martyrdom around 107 AD. His letters, addressed to Christian communities in Smyrna, Tralles, Philadelphia, and other urban centers, emphasize the importance of unity under episcopal leadership, adherence to shared doctrine, and the rejection of divergent teachings that threatened communal cohesion. Ignatius stressed the centrality of the bishop in maintaining order and doctrinal fidelity, presenting a model of authority and hierarchical oversight that would inform the subsequent institutional structures of the Church. The use of the term Catholic signaled not only the universality of the community, but also its emerging identity as a cohesive religious organization distinct from other Jewish sects and heterodox Christian groups. During this period, the geographic distribution of Christian communities expanded significantly throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Urban centers such as Antioch, Ephesus, Smyrna, Corinth, and Rome became focal points for organized worship, community governance, and missionary activity. The placement of bishops in these cities reflected both their strategic importance and the practical necessity of providing authoritative leadership capable of coordinating multiple congregations within each urban environment. Leadership roles were formalized to varying degrees, with bishops exercising oversight, presbyters managing local congregations, and deacons facilitating administrative, charitable, and logistical functions. The consolidation of these roles contributed to the increasing stability and continuity of communities across dispersed regions. Quantitatively, the Christian movement experienced continued growth during this period. Estimates suggest that by the early 2nd century, urban Christian communities in major centers numbered in the several hundreds to over 1,000 adherents, supported by house-based assemblies, communal gatherings, and regional coordination. These populations were composed of both Jewish and Gentile converts, reflecting the successful integration of diverse social, cultural, and linguistic groups. The process of integrating Gentiles required careful negotiation of ritual and doctrinal practices, including circumcision, dietary restrictions, and Sabbath observance, resulting in frameworks that emphasized ethical principles over ritual obligations to accommodate non-Jewish members. The early 2nd century also witnessed increased interaction with the broader socio-political environment of the Roman Empire. Christianity remained a minority movement, often viewed with suspicion by local authorities due to its nonconformity to conventional religious practices, refusal to participate in emperor worship, and perceived exclusivity. Sporadic episodes of persecution occurred, varying by region and local governance, but overall, the movement adapted through decentralized, resilient community structures. Apostolic and episcopal oversight ensured doctrinal fidelity, ritual consistency, and practical governance despite external pressures. These adaptations strengthened the internal cohesion of communities and laid the foundation for the later institutional consolidation that would characterize the Catholic Church. Doctrinally, the period 90 to 110 AD was marked by efforts to codify teachings, clarify theological principles, and address heterodox movements. Various interpretations of Jesus' teachings and claims regarding his identity, the nature of salvation, and the significance of his crucifixion and resurrection required authoritative adjudication. Letters attributed to Ignatius, as well as other contemporary writings, emphasized the continuity of teachings transmitted from the apostles, the authority of bishops as custodians of doctrine, and the necessity of unity in belief and practice. This process of doctrinal consolidation functioned both to distinguish the movement from competing religious groups and to provide a coherent framework for the integration of newly converted populations. The use of the term Catholic during this period also reflects the movement's awareness of its own universality and distinct identity. By articulating a collective identity as a universal community, leaders reinforced both the theological and organizational dimensions of early Christianity. This identity encompassed adherence to shared ethical precepts, common ritual practices, and mutual recognition of authority structures across dispersed communities. The concept of universality signaled an intention to transcend local, ethnic, and linguistic boundaries, establishing the movement as a coherent religious entity capable of expansion throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. Institutional developments during this period included the formalization of episcopal authority in urban centers, the delineation of roles and responsibilities within local communities, and the establishment of mechanisms for dispute resolution and doctrinal clarification. Bishops exercised oversight over multiple congregations within a city or region. Presbyters provided localized leadership and teaching, and deacons managed charitable distribution and logistical organization. The consolidation of these roles contributed to organizational stability, ensuring that communities could maintain continuity, adhere to doctrinal norms, and respond effectively to internal and external challenges. The early 2nd century also saw the continued expansion of Christian communities along major trade and communication routes throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. The integration of urban centers such as Alexandria, Antioch, and Ephesus facilitated the transmission of teachings, administrative coordination, and the distribution of authoritative texts. Communication networks, including itinerant leaders, correspondents, and regional councils, allowed for consistent guidance across geographically dispersed populations. These mechanisms strengthened cohesion and reinforced the emerging institutional identity of the movement, providing the foundation for the subsequent formalization of authority and hierarchy. Cultural and socioeconomic considerations influenced the development of early Christian communities during this period. Communities were composed of members from diverse social backgrounds, including artisans, tradespeople, laborers, and urban professionals. Women participated in various capacities, including leadership roles within households, organizational support, and charitable activities. The integration of these diverse populations required adaptive strategies for governance, ritual practice, and doctrinal instruction. Leaders sought to maintain coherence while accommodating local cultural variations, ensuring that communal identity and ethical principles were preserved across regions. Theological developments in this period emphasized the continuity of teachings from the ministry of Jesus through the apostles, while addressing emerging questions regarding the relationship between Jewish law and the obligations of Gentile converts. Discussions concerning circumcision, dietary law, and participation in Jewish festivals were resolved through deliberative processes, often mediated by apostles and bishops. The resulting frameworks prioritized ethical principles, communal cohesion, and doctrinal fidelity, providing mechanisms for the integration of diverse populations while maintaining the integrity of the movement's teachings. Quantitative and demographic data indicate that Christian communities in urban centers such as Antioch, Rome, and Alexandria had become sufficiently large to require structured administrative oversight. House-based gatherings served as the primary venue for worship and instruction, but the scale of membership necessitated coordination across multiple locations. Bishops and presbyters provided guidance on ritual practices, doctrinal instruction, and conflict resolution, while deacons facilitated practical operations, including the distribution of resources, care for the poor, and logistical support for communal activities. By the end of the 1st century and the beginning of the 2nd century, the emergent church demonstrated both organizational sophistication and doctrinal consistency. The use of the term Catholic reflected an increasing awareness of the universality of the movement, the need for hierarchical coordination, and the aspiration to maintain unity across geographically dispersed communities. The establishment of episcopal authority, codification of teachings, and integration of diverse populations provided the structural and theological foundations necessary for subsequent institutional consolidation, which would intensify during the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Interactions with the Roman socio-political environment continued to shape the strategies and practices of early Christian communities. While the movement remained subject to occasional persecution and social suspicion, the decentralized nature of leadership, the adaptability of communities, and the emphasis on doctrinal and ritual consistency enabled resilience and sustained growth. Leaders maintained continuity with apostolic teaching while negotiating the challenges posed by external authority, local customs, and internal variation, ensuring both survival and expansion. The integration of Gentile populations during this period had significant implications for the theological and organizational evolution of the movement. By establishing principles for inclusion and adapting ritual practices, early leaders facilitated the expansion of communities beyond Jewish populations, thereby broadening the demographic base and geographic reach. This process contributed to the emergent universality implied by the term Catholic and reinforced the structural and doctrinal mechanisms necessary for the movement's sustainability across diverse cultural and social contexts. Textual and documentary evidence from this period, including the letters of Ignatius and contemporaneous Christian writings, provides insight into both the theological priorities and organizational strategies of early Christian leaders. These documents emphasize the importance of unity, hierarchical oversight, doctrinal fidelity, and ethical conduct, illustrating the dual focus on spiritual instruction and institutional management. The consistency of guidance across multiple urban centers demonstrates the early development of mechanisms for maintaining coherence across a widely dispersed religious movement. By approximately 110 AD, the term Catholic had acquired both descriptive and normative significance. It signified the universality of the Christian movement, the aspiration for unity across communities, and the emerging recognition of authoritative leadership through bishops. This period marked a transition from loosely organized post-apostolic communities to a more coordinated and hierarchical system capable of supporting sustained doctrinal, liturgical, and organizational cohesion. The convergence of theological principles, administrative structures, and demographic expansion laid the groundwork for subsequent consolidation and the formal recognition of the Church as a distinct and enduring religious institution. The period 90 to 110 AD thus represents a critical stage in the historical development of the Catholic Church. The emergence of the term Catholic reflects both conceptual self-definition and practical organizational needs, signaling the movement's growing awareness of its universality and structural cohesion. Episcopal authority, doctrinal standardization, integration of diverse populations, and strategic geographic expansion collectively established the conditions for the formalization of the Church in subsequent centuries. The developments of this period ensured continuity with apostolic foundations while addressing the practical realities of leadership, governance, and doctrinal oversight in an increasingly complex and expansive religious movement. During the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, the Christian movement that had begun under the ministry of Jesus and the apostolic leadership of Peter, Paul, and their contemporaries faced a critical period of organizational consolidation, doctrinal clarification, and hierarchical development. The period approximately 100 to 300 AD was characterized by both internal challenges, including divergent teachings and heretical movements, and external pressures from the Roman Empire, where Christianity remained a minority religion subject to varying degrees of suspicion, restriction, and occasional persecution. These centuries were formative in defining the organizational and theological identity of the Catholic Church, as communities across the Mediterranean and Near East sought to maintain continuity with apostolic teachings while adapting to complex socio-political environments. The organizational framework of early Christian communities, established in the 1st century, became increasingly formalized during this period. Bishops, presbyters, and deacons constituted the primary leadership structure, with bishops serving as regional overseers responsible for doctrinal guidance, community administration, and dispute resolution. Bishops in major urban centers, such as Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and Carthage, gained authority through their ability to coordinate multiple congregations, interpret apostolic teaching, and provide moral and disciplinary guidance. Presbyters, elders, assisted in local administration, preaching, and teaching, while deacons managed charitable distribution, logistical support, and the maintenance of communal resources. This hierarchical organization provided both continuity and stability across dispersed communities, facilitating adherence to established norms and cohesion among members. Quantitative estimates suggest that Christian communities continued to grow steadily during this period, with urban populations numbering in the hundreds to several thousand in larger cities, including Rome, Antioch, Alexandria, Ephesus, and Corinth. House-based assemblies remained the primary loci of worship, instruction, and communal activities, though larger communities developed networks of smaller congregations coordinated through episcopal oversight. The expansion into smaller towns and rural areas extended the reach of the movement, requiring adaptive strategies for leadership, teaching, and ritual practice to maintain cohesion across geographically diverse contexts. Communication relied on itinerant leaders, correspondence, and regional gatherings, allowing for coordination of doctrine, ritual, and disciplinary matters despite logistical challenges. Doctrinal development became a central concern during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, as Christian communities confronted internal divisions and the emergence of heterodox movements. These included Gnosticism, Marcionism, Montanism, and other interpretations that challenged or reinterpreted apostolic teachings. Leaders within the Church, including bishops, theologians, and councils of presbyters, sought to clarify the content of Christian doctrine, establish authoritative texts, and define boundaries for acceptable belief and practice. The formulation of orthodoxy involved both theological reasoning and practical enforcement, ensuring that communities adhered to consistent interpretations of Jesus' teachings, the significance of his crucifixion and resurrection, and the nature of salvation. Textual production played a key role in doctrinal consolidation. The compilation and circulation of letters, gospels, and other writings provided authoritative references for communities and leaders. The process of evaluating and determining the reliability and authority of texts contributed to the eventual formation of the New Testament canon. Early Church Fathers, including Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch, and Polycarp of Smyrna, produced writings that reinforced apostolic authority, addressed disputes, and instructed communities in ethical and doctrinal matters. These documents emphasized continuity with the teachings of Jesus and the apostles, reinforcing the legitimacy of established leaders and providing guidance for practical governance and communal life. Internal disputes during this period often concerned both theological interpretation and organizational authority. Questions arose regarding the role of bishops, the validity of ritual practices, and the inclusion of Gentile converts. Resolution of these disputes relied on episcopal authority, regional councils, and correspondence among leaders, establishing procedural norms for conflict resolution and doctrinal clarification. These practices contributed to the stabilization of communities, ensured the transmission of consistent teachings, and reinforced the hierarchical structures necessary for long-term institutional continuity. External pressures from the Roman Empire influenced organizational and doctrinal development. Christians were subject to varying degrees of suspicion due to their refusal to participate in emperor worship, adherence to distinct ethical codes, and perceived exclusivity. Periodic persecutions, including those under emperors Nero, Domitian, Trajan, and later Decius and Valerian, imposed constraints on public worship and necessitated clandestine gatherings, often in private homes or catacombs. These challenges reinforced the importance of strong leadership, doctrinal cohesion, and communal solidarity. Leaders developed mechanisms for the protection of members, including the identification of trustworthy leaders, procedures for handling apostasy or lapses under persecution, and strategies for maintaining continuity despite the loss of community members to imprisonment or execution. Theologically, the 2nd and 3rd centuries were marked by efforts to define the relationship between Jesus' teachings and existing Jewish law, particularly in communities with significant Gentile populations. Leaders emphasized ethical conduct, ritual adaptation, and theological interpretation that would unify diverse communities. Disputes over circumcision, dietary laws, and participation in Jewish festivals were addressed through apostolic precedents and local episcopal authority, establishing norms that balanced continuity with innovation. This approach facilitated the integration of non-Jewish converts while maintaining the theological integrity and communal identity derived from the original apostolic foundations. Heresies, including Gnosticism and Marcionism, challenged the emerging orthodoxy by proposing alternative interpretations of Scripture, cosmology, and soteriology. Gnostic movements emphasized esoteric knowledge as the path to salvation, often presenting a dualistic worldview that contradicted the ethical and theological frameworks transmitted by the apostles. Marcionism rejected the Hebrew Scriptures and proposed a selective canon emphasizing the writings of Paul. Responses to these movements included the articulation of authoritative teachings, reinforcement of episcopal oversight, and the eventual formalization of canonical texts. This process established the boundaries of orthodoxy, reinforcing both theological and organizational cohesion across Christian communities. Liturgical practices continued to develop and standardize during this period. The celebration of the Eucharist, reading of Scripture, and observance of baptism were formalized, with variations adapted to local contexts. Bishops and presbyters guided ritual practice, ensuring uniformity in theological emphasis and procedural observance. The codification of liturgical norms contributed to communal cohesion, reinforced the authority of leadership, and provided continuity with the teachings and practices originating in the apostolic period. Charitable and social functions of the communities were significant in consolidating organizational authority. Leaders coordinated the distribution of resources to the poor, care for widows and orphans, and provision for those persecuted or displaced. These activities not only addressed practical needs, but also reinforced the moral and ethical authority of the leadership, strengthened communal bonds, and enhanced the appeal of the movement to potential converts. The integration of social, ethical, and ritual functions within a structured hierarchy contributed to the development of a resilient institutional framework capable of enduring both internal and external pressures. Regional coordination became increasingly important as the number of communities grew. Bishops in urban centers provided oversight to multiple congregations within a city or region. Presbyters administered local assemblies, and deacons facilitated communication and logistical support. Epistolary correspondence, occasional synods, and consultation among leaders allowed for consistency in doctrinal instruction, ritual practice, and disciplinary measures. These mechanisms for intercommunity coordination established precedents for the later formal councils that would codify doctrine and govern the universal church. By the 3rd century, the institutional presence of Christianity had expanded to include communities throughout the Roman Empire, including Asia Minor, Greece, North Africa, and the Italian peninsula. Urban centers, particularly Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria, became hubs of theological, administrative, and social leadership. Bishops in these centers increasingly exercised authority beyond their immediate congregations, asserting influence over regional practices, doctrinal disputes, and integration of converts. This concentration of leadership authority laid the groundwork for the centralization of ecclesiastical structures in subsequent centuries. Socio-political events, including periods of persecution under emperors Decius, Valerian, and later Diocletian, prompted adaptations in organizational and doctrinal practice. Leaders developed strategies to maintain cohesion during periods of persecution, including clandestine gatherings, protective leadership networks, and procedures for reconciliation of members who had lapsed under pressure. These strategies reinforced both communal resilience and the authority of established leaders, ensuring continuity in the face of external threats. The institutional experience gained during these challenges contributed to the Church's capacity for governance, conflict resolution, and doctrinal preservation in subsequent centuries. The period also witnessed the ongoing refinement of the hierarchical structure. Bishops of major urban centers increasingly assumed a coordinating role across multiple communities, establishing the model for regional episcopal authority that would later inform the primacy of the Bishop of Rome. Presbyters and deacons operated within a clearly defined functional hierarchy, supporting the administration of liturgy, doctrinal instruction, charitable activity, and community cohesion. This structure allowed for the consistent application of doctrinal and ethical standards across dispersed populations, providing a stable framework for the continued growth and consolidation of the Church. By the end of the 3rd century, the organizational and doctrinal developments of the 2nd and 3rd centuries had transformed the Christian movement from loosely connected post-apostolic communities into a coherent, hierarchical institution. Leadership structures were formalized, doctrinal boundaries clarified, and mechanisms for intercommunity coordination established. The Church had developed the capacity to withstand external pressures, integrate diverse populations, and maintain continuity with the teachings of Jesus and the apostles. These developments established the foundations for the subsequent period of imperial recognition and institutional centralization that would define the Church's emergence as a dominant religious institution within the Roman world. The period leading to the legalization and imperial recognition of Christianity represents a decisive phase in the historical consolidation of the Church as a structured institution within the Roman Empire. By the early 4th century AD, Christianity had transitioned from a marginalized religious movement, often subject to persecution, into a legally recognized faith capable of exercising influence across the political, social, and cultural structures of the empire. The pivotal moment of this transformation occurred with the issuance of the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. a proclamation that granted freedom of worship to Christians and effectively ended the systemic state-sponsored persecutions that had previously constrained the movement. The socio-political context preceding the edict was shaped by decades of fluctuating imperial attitudes toward Christianity. Throughout the 3rd century AD, emperors such as Decius, 249 to 251 AD, Valerian, 253 to 260 AD, and Diocletian, 284 to 305 AD, implemented varying policies, ranging from temporary tolerance to severe persecution, reflecting both the perceived threat of Christian exclusivity to Roman religious traditions and the broader challenges of imperial administration. The persecutions were often localized and irregular, with intensity determined by regional governors, urban authorities, and social dynamics within cities. Christians were targeted for their refusal to participate in imperial cult practices, their rejection of traditional pagan rites, and their association with exclusive ethical and communal norms that diverged from conventional Roman societal expectations. Despite these challenges, Christian communities demonstrated resilience and organizational sophistication developed during the preceding centuries. Bishops in major urban centers such as Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and Carthage provided hierarchical oversight, doctrinal continuity, and community cohesion. The ability of these leaders to maintain networks of correspondence, provide pastoral guidance, and coordinate responses to persecution ensured that communities persisted despite legal and social pressures. House-based gatherings and clandestine meetings facilitated worship, instruction, and sacramental observance, maintaining cohesion and continuity of practice even in regions experiencing heightened scrutiny. The early 4th century also coincided with broader imperial transformations under Constantine I, reigned 306 to 337 AD. Constantine's rise to power was marked by military campaigns and political consolidation, during which religious policy played a strategic role in stabilizing the empire and consolidating authority. Constantine's personal engagement with Christianity, often described in contemporary sources as influenced by his reported vision before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, informed his approach to religious policy. Historical reconstructions suggest that Constantine recognized both the social utility of a unified religious community and the potential of Christianity to serve as a stabilizing ideological force across the empire. In 313 AD, Constantine, in conjunction with co-emperor Licinius, issued the Edict of Milan, which proclaimed freedom of religion and guaranteed legal protection for Christian communities. The edict stipulated that Christians could practice their faith openly without fear of coercion, reclaim confiscated property, and construct places of worship. This legislation marked a formal departure from centuries of intermittent persecution and represented the first instance of imperial endorsement of Christianity as a legitimate religious institution. The Edict of Milan did not establish Christianity as the state religion, but granted privileges that enabled the Church to organize, acquire resources, and participate more fully in the civic life of the empire. The immediate impact of the edict was multifaceted. First, it allowed the Church to acquire property previously confiscated during periods of persecution, including meeting spaces, homes, and burial grounds. These acquisitions facilitated the construction of dedicated places of worship, including basilicas and churches, which enabled more structured liturgical practices and communal gatherings. Second, The legal recognition strengthened the administrative authority of bishops, who could now exercise jurisdiction over property, manage charitable activities, and coordinate regional communities without the threat of state interference. Third, the edict provided a framework for the Church to interact with civil authorities, negotiate privileges, and establish formal relations with imperial officials, laying the groundwork for future integration of ecclesiastical and political structures. Organizational developments following the Edict of Milan included the formalization of hierarchical authority and administrative mechanisms. Bishops in major cities increasingly coordinated the activities of multiple congregations within their jurisdictions. Presbyters managed local assemblies, and deacons supervised practical operations, including charitable distribution, education, and resource management. The capacity for centralized administration enabled communities to respond effectively to both internal disputes and external opportunities, providing a foundation for the expansion of the Church's influence in civic, social, and political spheres. The consolidation of episcopal authority during this period established precedents for the primacy of certain sees, particularly Rome, in subsequent centuries. Doctrinal consolidation continued in tandem with institutional development. The 4th century was marked by ongoing debates regarding Christology, the nature of the Trinity, and the relationship between scriptural authority and ecclesiastical interpretation. Bishops, theologians, and councils developed frameworks for resolving these disputes, ensuring consistency in teaching across regions and reinforcing the authority of episcopal oversight. The Edict of Milan enabled these doctrinal discussions to occur openly, facilitating the circulation of theological writings, regional synods, and the establishment of shared interpretive standards. These processes strengthened communal identity and provided a coherent intellectual and moral framework for Christian practice. The legalization of Christianity also catalyzed the Church's engagement with broader social and economic networks. Communities gained access to urban infrastructures, participated in civic initiatives, and expanded charitable operations to support the poor, widows, orphans, and displaced populations. The acquisition of property and resources allowed the Church to institutionalize welfare functions, establishing hospitals, schools, and food distribution networks in major cities. These activities reinforced the moral authority of ecclesiastical leadership, enhanced social cohesion, and positioned the Church as a critical actor within the administrative and cultural landscape of the Roman Empire. Geographically, the effects of legalization extended throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. Urban centers such as Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and Constantinople became hubs of administrative, doctrinal, and social activity. Regional bishops coordinated communities across provincial territories, ensuring doctrinal uniformity and organizational stability. The expansion of legal recognition enabled missionaries and itinerant leaders to operate with reduced risk, facilitating the dissemination of Christian teachings to regions previously constrained by persecution or social hostility. This period established the structural and strategic framework for the Church's eventual expansion into Western Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Communication and coordination across the empire were enhanced by legal recognition. Bishops could correspond openly, convene councils, and issue decrees with the authority of both ecclesiastical and civic sanction. Letters, theological treatises, and regional synods allowed for the systematic dissemination of doctrine, resolution of disputes, and standardization of liturgical practices. The formalization of these communication networks reinforced hierarchical authority, ensured continuity with apostolic traditions, and provided mechanisms for managing doctrinal and organizational challenges across diverse and dispersed communities. Legal recognition also impacted the integration of Gentile populations and the ongoing negotiation between Jewish and non-Jewish converts. The ability to operate openly facilitated the development of educational programs, catechetical instruction, and doctrinal guidance for new converts, ensuring alignment with established theological frameworks. Bishops and presbyters supervised these processes, reinforcing communal norms and providing oversight for ritual and ethical instruction. These practices strengthened the capacity of the Church to accommodate demographic expansion while maintaining doctrinal and organizational coherence. The Edict of Milan also had significant implications for the Church's engagement with imperial authorities and political structures. Bishops were increasingly called upon to advise, mediate, and coordinate activities with civic officials. The ability to operate within the legal framework of the empire allowed for the establishment of privileges, negotiation of property rights, and participation in public initiatives. This relationship between ecclesiastical and imperial authority laid the foundation for the eventual emergence of the Church as a central institution within the governance and cultural infrastructure of the Roman world. Cultural and social factors during this period influenced both the form and function of ecclesiastical authority. Christian communities operated in multilingual and multicultural environments, including Greek-speaking urban centers in the Eastern Mediterranean, Latin-speaking regions in Italy and Gaul, and culturally diverse provinces in North Africa and Asia Minor. Leadership structures, liturgical practices, and theological instruction were adapted to these contexts, maintaining continuity with apostolic teachings while addressing local cultural norms and social conditions. The ability to integrate diverse populations, languages, and practices into a coherent ecclesiastical framework contributed to the Church's resilience, expansion, and influence. By the mid-4th century, the effects of the Edict of Milan were consolidated through the development of centralized ecclesiastical structures, formalized hierarchical authority, and expanded doctrinal standardization. Bishops of prominent sees exercised regional influence, coordinated councils and synods, and mediated doctrinal disputes, while presbyters and deacons implemented local governance, ritual oversight, and social programs. The legal and political recognition of the Church enabled the formal integration of ecclesiastical and civil structures, providing resources, legitimacy, and authority that had been previously unavailable. This period established the institutional and organizational framework for the Church's subsequent evolution into a dominant religious institution within the Roman Empire and, later, Europe. Quantitative and operational data from this period indicate the scale and complexity of church administration. Major urban centers contained multiple congregations coordinated under a single episcopal authority, supported by networks of presbyters and deacons responsible for teaching, ritual, and social welfare. The acquisition of property and resources facilitated the construction of dedicated worship spaces, administrative centers, and charitable institutions. Communication and coordination extended across provincial boundaries, enabling doctrinal consistency, hierarchical oversight, and effective resource allocation. Legalization and imperial recognition had lasting consequences for the Church's identity, structure, and global influence. The capacity to operate openly, acquire property, and coordinate regional communities solidified the institutional foundations of the Church. Episcopal authority was formalized and reinforced, providing mechanisms for doctrinal, liturgical, and administrative continuity. Integration of diverse populations, engagement with civic structures, and expansion of social and charitable functions strengthened communal cohesion and positioned the Church as a central actor within the social, cultural, and political framework of the Roman Empire. Following the legalization of Christianity through the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, the Church entered a period of accelerated institutional consolidation, doctrinal clarification, and hierarchical centralization. The 4th and 5th centuries AD marked the formalization of ecclesiastical structures, the resolution of key theological controversies, and the emergence of universal norms that would define the Catholic Church as a coherent, hierarchical, and doctrinally unified institution. The period spanning 325 to the late 5th century witnessed the convening of ecumenical councils, the standardization of liturgical practice, the establishment of canonical texts, and the elevation of the Bishop of Rome to a position of preeminent authority within the Church. The First Council of Nicaea, convened in 325 AD under the auspices of Emperor Constantine I, represents the initial effort to resolve doctrinal disputes that threatened communal cohesion and to establish authoritative norms across the Christian communities of the empire. The primary focus of the council was the Arian controversy, a theological debate concerning the nature of the relationship between God the Father and Jesus Christ. Arius, a presbyter from Alexandria, contended that the Son was a created being, subordinate to the Father rather than co-eternal. This claim challenged the doctrinal continuity of the Church and required resolution to maintain theological unity. Bishops from across the empire, estimated at over 300 in attendance, participated in the council to debate, deliberate, and codify doctrinal orthodoxy. The Nicene Council produced the original Nicene Creed, which articulated the consubstantiality of the Son with the Father, homoousios, thereby rejecting Arianism as heterodox. The Council also addressed practical matters, including the date of Easter, the organization of episcopal authority, and disciplinary norms for clergy. The decisions established a precedent for ecumenical councils as instruments for doctrinal clarification, the coordination of church governance, and the maintenance of unity across geographically dispersed communities. This council reinforced the principle that authoritative teaching required collective deliberation among bishops, and that orthodoxy was to be enforced through formalized structures. Subsequent councils and synods in the 4th century continued to refine doctrinal standards and organizational frameworks. The First Council of Constantinople in 381 AD expanded the Nicene Creed, affirming the divinity of the Holy Spirit and addressing residual Arian influences within the empire. Regional synods and provincial councils, including those in Antioch, Carthage, and Alexandria, addressed localized theological disputes, heretical movements, and disciplinary matters, ensuring consistency in practice and belief across multiple jurisdictions. Bishops in metropolitan centers exercised oversight over regional assemblies, coordinating adherence to ecumenical decisions and resolving deviations from established doctrine. Canonical development progressed alongside doctrinal consolidation. By the late 4th century, a consensus on the New Testament canon was largely established, incorporating the 4 Gospels, Acts, Pauline epistles, general epistles, and revelation. Canonical codification served multiple purposes, providing authoritative sources for teaching, unifying liturgical practice, and delineating boundaries between orthodoxy and heterodoxy. Textual consistency was enforced through episcopal oversight, scriptural instruction in congregations, and the circulation of approved manuscripts. The integration of canonical texts into liturgical and educational practices reinforced communal cohesion and facilitated the transmission of doctrinal standards across generations and regions. Liturgical formalization advanced in parallel with doctrinal and canonical consolidation. The structure of the Eucharist, baptismal rites, and other sacramental practices became standardized, guided by episcopal authority and codified instructions. Variations in local ritual practice were gradually aligned with regional and universal norms, promoting uniformity across urban and provincial communities. The formalization of liturgy reinforced both theological coherence and organizational stability, providing a consistent framework for worship, instruction, and communal identity. The elevation of the Bishop of Rome to a position of preeminence emerged as a defining feature of this period. Historical continuity traced the Roman episcopate to Peter, traditionally regarded as the first bishop of Rome, providing both symbolic and institutional legitimacy. The strategic location of Rome as the imperial capital and its historical associations with apostolic authority facilitated the recognition of its bishop as a principal arbiter of doctrinal and disciplinary matters. This development contributed to the centralization of authority, coordination of ecumenical councils, and enforcement of orthodoxy throughout the western and eastern provinces. Theological debates during the 4th and 5th centuries extended beyond Arianism to encompass Christological controversies, including Nestorianism and Monophysitism. Nestorius, Patriarch of Constantinople, argued for a distinction between the human and divine natures of Christ, challenging prevailing theological consensus. The Council of Ephesus in 431 AD addressed this dispute, affirming the unity of Christ's person and condemning Nestorian teachings. Monophysitism, asserting the singular divine nature of Christ, was addressed at the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD, which articulated the doctrine of the hypostatic union, affirming that Christ possessed both fully human and fully divine natures. These councils involved hundreds of bishops from diverse regions and produced formal decrees, creeds, and canons that standardized doctrine across the empire. Regional and global coordination of these councils was facilitated by imperial patronage, episcopal networks, and communication channels linking urban centers. The Roman Empire's administrative infrastructure allowed for the dissemination of council decrees, the enforcement of doctrinal decisions, and oversight of ecclesiastical compliance. Bishops in metropolitan sees supervised implementation in provincial communities, while presbyters and deacons ensured local adherence to liturgical, disciplinary, and doctrinal standards. This multi-tiered system reinforced continuity with apostolic teaching while providing mechanisms to address local deviations and heretical tendencies. The consolidation of the ecclesiastical hierarchy during this period was accompanied by the development of administrative and legal frameworks. Canons issued by councils established norms for clerical conduct, disciplinary procedures, and mechanisms for resolving disputes within and between communities. Bishops were empowered to adjudicate matters of doctrine, moral conduct, and ritual practice, while metropolitan and provincial synods provided oversight and coordination. Deacons and presbyters implemented these directives locally, ensuring operational consistency and institutional stability. The formalization of these structures contributed to the Church's ability to maintain cohesion across a vast and culturally diverse empire. The organizational centralization and doctrinal standardization of the 4th and 5th centuries were closely linked to the Church's social and charitable functions. Bishops coordinated assistance to the poor, orphans, widows, and other marginalized populations, integrating social welfare into the institutional identity of the Church. These activities reinforced episcopal authority, enhanced communal solidarity, and expanded the Church's influence within urban and rural settings. The integration of administrative, social, and liturgical functions created a resilient institutional framework capable of responding to both internal and external challenges. Canonical legislation during this period also addressed property rights, ecclesiastical jurisdiction, and interaction with imperial authorities. Church properties, including basilicas, monasteries, and cemeteries, were placed under episcopal oversight, with legal protections provided by imperial decree. Clerical appointments, disciplinary enforcement, and dispute resolution were codified, establishing a legal framework that supported hierarchical authority and institutional continuity. The convergence of religious, legal, and administrative authority contributed to the emergence of the Church as a prominent socio-political institution. The global dimension of these developments is evident in the coordination between Eastern and Western provinces. Councils involved representatives from diverse geographic regions, including Asia Minor, Greece, Italy, North Africa, and Gaul. This coordination ensured that doctrinal and disciplinary norms were applied consistently across cultural and linguistic boundaries. Mechanisms such as synods, correspondence, and imperial enforcement facilitated compliance and reinforced the universality of the Church, reflecting the conceptual foundation of the term Catholic, established in the early 2nd century. Monasticism and ascetic movements also contributed to doctrinal and institutional consolidation during the 4th and 5th centuries. Figures such as Anthony of Egypt, Pachomius, and Basil of Caesarea promoted communal monastic structures, ascetic discipline, and theological study, providing centers of education, spiritual formation, and doctrinal preservation. Monastic communities supported the episcopacy by training clergy, copying manuscripts, and serving as models of ethical conduct, reinforcing the Church's hierarchical and doctrinal framework. Monastic influence extended across the Mediterranean and into Western Europe, creating networks that connected urban episcopal centers with rural and frontier regions. By the end of the 5th century, the cumulative effect of councils, doctrinal standardization, hierarchical centralization, liturgical formalization, canonical codification, and social integration had transformed the Church into a universal institution with a clearly defined theological, organizational, and legal identity. The Bishop of Rome emerged as a central figure of authority, while metropolitan and provincial bishops coordinated regional compliance and doctrinal adherence. Clerical hierarchies of presbyters and deacons implemented policies locally, ensuring continuity and operational stability. Liturgical practices, canonical texts, and ethical norms were standardized across diverse populations, providing cohesion in belief and practice. The formalization of doctrine and ecclesiastical structure during this period also positioned the Church for further expansion beyond the Roman Empire. Missionary activity, communication networks, and standardized instruction allowed for the transmission of faith to regions in Europe, North Africa, and Asia Minor. The Church's institutional framework provided the administrative capacity to manage communities in diverse cultural and social contexts, ensuring resilience, doctrinal fidelity, and organizational coherence. The origins of the Catholic Church encompass a dual framework encompassing both a theological foundation established by Jesus of Nazareth during his ministry in 30 to 33 AD and a historical process of institutional consolidation and doctrinal formalization that spanned the first 5 centuries AD. This duality reflects the simultaneous development of a spiritual community based on apostolic instruction and a structured organization capable of exercising governance, doctrinal oversight, and liturgical regulation across the Mediterranean and, later, the broader Roman world. The integration of these two dimensions, spiritual origin and institutional evolution, constitutes the historical foundation of the Catholic Church. From a theological perspective, the foundation of the Church derives directly from the ministry and teachings of Jesus. During his ministry in Judea and Galilee, Jesus assembled a core group of 12 apostles, instructing them to perpetuate his teachings, maintain communal cohesion, and guide believers in moral, ethical, and spiritual practice. Peter, designated in Catholic tradition as the first bishop of Rome, is accorded a pivotal role in apostolic succession, symbolizing continuity with Jesus' leadership and providing the basis for hierarchical authority within the emerging church. This apostolic foundation established the spiritual and doctrinal norms that would guide subsequent generations of Christian communities, serving as the primary reference for orthodoxy and ethical instruction. The immediate post-crucifixion period, approximately 33 to 50 AD, was marked by the dissemination of Christian teachings through networks established by the apostles and early disciples. Communities were organized around local leaders, including bishops, presbyters, and deacons, who coordinated worship, instruction, and charitable activities. The missionary efforts of figures such as Paul of Tarsus facilitated the expansion of Christianity beyond Jewish populations into Gentile communities across Asia Minor, Greece, and the Italian peninsula. This expansion created diverse congregations that required mechanisms for doctrinal standardization, leadership accountability, and communal coordination. During the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the Church encountered internal and external challenges that necessitated refinement of both organizational and doctrinal structures. Internal disputes arose from divergent interpretations of apostolic teachings, the emergence of heterodox movements such as Gnosticism and Marcionism, and disagreements over ritual and ethical practices. Bishops assumed increasing responsibility for adjudicating doctrinal disputes, guiding communities, and enforcing moral and ritual standards. Externally, sporadic persecution by Roman authorities imposed additional constraints on communal organization, compelling leaders to develop strategies for resilience, clandestine coordination, and protection of adherents. By the early 2nd century, the term Catholic, derived from the Greek katholikos, denoting universality, was employed by Ignatius of Antioch to signify the comprehensive and inclusive nature of the Church. This terminology reflected both theological claims regarding the universality of Christian teaching and organizational objectives to maintain cohesion across geographically dispersed communities. The institutional hierarchy, centered on bishops of major urban centers, became increasingly formalized, creating channels for communication, oversight, and doctrinal enforcement. Rome gradually emerged as a central authority, with its bishop recognized for both apostolic legacy and strategic urban prominence, establishing a model for subsequent primacy within the Church. The 2nd and 3rd centuries AD were critical in consolidating the Church's institutional framework. Bishops exercised authority over local and regional communities, presbyters managed congregational functions, and deacons coordinated charitable, administrative, and logistical operations. Councils, correspondence, and synodal gatherings facilitated doctrinal consistency, the resolution of disputes, and the maintenance of hierarchical oversight. Liturgical practices, including the Eucharist, baptism, and other sacramental rites, became increasingly standardized, ensuring cohesion and ritual observance across culturally and geographically diverse communities. The integration of social welfare functions, including the care of the poor, widows, and orphans, reinforced both ethical authority and communal identity. The early 4th century witnessed transformative developments with the conversion of Constantine I and the issuance of the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. Legal recognition enabled the Church to operate openly, acquire property, construct dedicated places of worship, and engage directly with civic authorities. Episcopal authority was reinforced, facilitating regional coordination and doctrinal enforcement. The Church's organizational capacity expanded, integrating administrative, social, and liturgical functions within a coherent hierarchical framework. These developments marked a critical transition from a primarily decentralized movement to a structured institution capable of sustaining long-term growth and governance. Ecumenical councils from the 4th to the 5th centuries formalized doctrinal orthodoxy and addressed theological controversies that had emerged across the empire. The First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD codified the consubstantiality of the Son with the Father, rejecting Arianism and establishing the principle that doctrinal disputes required collective deliberation among bishops. The First Council of Constantinople in 381 AD affirmed the divinity of the Holy Spirit and addressed remaining theological disputes. The Councils of Ephesus in 431 AD and Chalcedon in 451 AD resolved Christological controversies regarding the human and divine natures of Christ, defining the doctrine of the hypostatic union. These councils produced creeds, canons, and decrees that standardized doctrine, established procedures for disciplinary enforcement, and reinforced hierarchical authority across regions. The formalization of canonical texts complemented doctrinal consolidation. By the late 5th century, the New Testament canon, comprising the 4 Gospels, Acts, Pauline epistles, general epistles, and Revelation, was largely recognized and utilized in instruction, liturgy, and doctrinal justification. Textual standardization ensured continuity with apostolic teaching, delineated boundaries between orthodoxy and heresy, and reinforced episcopal authority in the enforcement of doctrinal adherence. The integration of canonical texts into worship and educational programs contributed to communal cohesion and facilitated the transmission of theological principles across generations. Hierarchical structures were fully operationalized during this period. Bishops of major urban centers coordinated regional networks of presbyters and deacons, ensuring doctrinal and ritual uniformity. The Bishop of Rome assumed a primatial role, providing mediation in disputes, presiding over synodal proceedings and asserting influence in both doctrinal and administrative matters. Presbyters and deacons implemented these directives at the local level, supervising congregational activities, charitable distribution, and liturgical observance. This hierarchical model enabled effective governance across diverse populations and regions, consolidating the Church's institutional authority. Monastic and ascetic movements contributed to doctrinal, educational, and organizational development. Figures such as Anthony of Egypt, Pachomius, and Basil of Caesarea established monastic communities that functioned as centers of theological instruction, manuscript preservation, and spiritual formation. Monasteries supported episcopal structures by training clergy, producing theological writings, and maintaining disciplinary and ethical standards. The integration of monastic networks with urban episcopal centers facilitated doctrinal dissemination, reinforced institutional authority, and extended the Church's influence into rural and peripheral regions. Liturgical uniformity was established through the regulation of sacramental practice, including the Eucharist, baptism, and seasonal observances. Bishops and presbyters supervised adherence to established rituals, ensuring that local practices aligned with regional and universal norms. Liturgical standardization reinforced doctrinal cohesion, provided continuity with apostolic traditions, and supported the Church's hierarchical governance model. Standardized worship also facilitated communal identity, ensuring that believers across the empire shared consistent theological and ritual experience. The Church's social functions expanded in response to demographic and urban growth. Bishops coordinated charitable programs, including food distribution, healthcare, and education, creating structured networks of assistance integrated with ecclesiastical governance. The provision of these services strengthened the ethical authority of church leadership, reinforced communal solidarity, and positioned the Church as a critical actor within civic and social structures. Legal recognition and resource acquisition following the Edict of Milan enabled systematic implementation of these programs at scale, further institutionalizing the Church's role within urban and provincial communities. The convergence of theological foundation and historical institutional development during the first 5 centuries AD provides a coherent framework for understanding the dual origins of the Catholic Church. The spiritual authority derived from Jesus' ministry, transmitted through the apostles, established the core doctrinal and ethical principles guiding Christian communities. The historical and organizational processes, encompassing episcopal hierarchy, doctrinal standardization, canonical codification, liturgical formalization, monastic networks, and social integration, produced a structured institution capable of sustaining coherence, governance, and expansion across regions and cultures. These two dimensions, spiritual foundation and institutional evolution, are inseparable in defining the identity, authority, and universality of the Catholic Church. By the late 5th century, the Church had fully emerged as a hierarchical and universal institution. Bishops of metropolitan centers exercised regional authority, coordinated doctrinal enforcement, and mediated disputes. Presbyters and deacons implemented governance locally, supervised sacramental and charitable activities, and maintained continuity with apostolic teaching. Liturgical practice was standardized, canonical texts were widely recognized, and doctrinal orthodoxy was enforced across regions. Monastic and ascetic movements extended the Church's reach into rural and peripheral areas, providing education, manuscript preservation, and spiritual formation. Social, administrative, and educational functions were integrated into a coherent institutional framework capable of sustaining growth, resilience, and influence. The dual origin of the Catholic Church, rooted in the ministry of Jesus and the subsequent historical development of a centralized institution, provides a historically accurate framework for understanding its emergence. While the spiritual foundation dates to 30 to 33 AD, the institutional realization of the Church as a hierarchical, universal body with defined doctrine, governance, and liturgy unfolded over several centuries, culminating in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. This integrated understanding reconciles theological claims with historical processes, situating the Church as both a spiritual community and a structured institution operating within complex political, social, and cultural environments.